The Dunn's Tribunal, Charlie Haughey's lawyer makes an 11th hour appeal for an indefinite adjournment. Senior Fine Gael ministers detail payments from Ben Dunn. The Taoiseach insists there were no favours. And as the health workers' strike deepens, hopes rise for a Labour court settlement. Hello and welcome to 6-1. Also on the programme this evening, the British Army defuse a bomb outside the Sinn Féin headquarters in Belfast.
And good evening from London. There's just over 48 hours of campaigning left in Britain's general election, and we'll be covering as many issues as possible. John Major's been in Northern Ireland, in Wales and Scotland today, but in fact he's right behind me now in Westminster, where he's addressing the party faithful. And his theme is that they've 72 hours to save the Union. Well, we'll be discussing that and other issues later in the bulletin, but for the moment, back to the studio and the rest of the day's news.
The main news today, the Payments to Politicians Tribunal, which has adjourned until next month, without ruling on whether Ben Dunn's solicitor, Noel Smith, should give evidence about his 5 meetings with former Taoiseach Charles Haughey. In a dramatic intervention this afternoon, counsel for Mr Haughey applied for an indefinite adjournment of the tribunal on the issue of confidentiality. The chairman of the inquiry said he would give a decision on the issue when the tribunal resumes at the earliest in 4 weeks' time, after gathering evidence in Britain and the Cayman Islands. Among those giving evidence today about payments from Ben Dunn were the Taoiseach, as well as several Fine Gael government ministers.
Ben Dunn's solicitor, Noel Smith, first mentioned his 5 meetings with Charles Haughey on Friday. His statement on these meetings was sent to Mr Haughey's home in Kinseely by the tribunal to allow the former Taoiseach to make legal representations on whether this evidence should be heard if he wished. Today, Mr Haughey's counsel, Ian McGonigal, said he was seeking limited representation at the tribunal on the issue of the confidentiality of the discussions with Mr Smith. He applied for an adjournment and said the issue should be determined only when the tribunal had finished its inquiries. Mr Justice Brian McCracken pointed out that the tribunal intended to adjourn today to pursue banking evidence in London and the Cayman Islands, and ruled that the issue of confidentiality should be resolved at the next sitting, which will not take place for at least 4 weeks. The tribunal has secured an order from the British courts requiring a number of bankers to give evidence. This will be taken in private and relayed to Justice McCracken. A similar order is being sought in the Cayman Islands, where the £1.3 million payments allegedly made to Mr Haughey were channelled. Also today, the Taoiseach and other senior Fine Gael ministers gave evidence about payments from Ben Dunn. The Taoiseach described how Mr Dunn gave him a cheque for £50,000 for Fine Gael at his home in Castleknock in April 1991. Mr Bruton told him that there would be no question of any favours being given in return for the contribution, and he said Mr Dunn agreed to this with alacrity. The Taoiseach was reminded of evidence he gave to the Beef Tribunal in July 1991, when he said it wasn't the norm for members of the parliamentary party or even the party leader to know the identity of donors to party funds. Counsel for the tribunal, Dennis McCullough, put it to him that it wasn't ideal for the party leader to be directly involved in soliciting donations because of the fear the contributions could be seen to influence the work of the parliamentary party. Mr Bruton said that while it was preferable that parliamentarians would not know the identity of donors, there was an onus on everyone in Fine Gael at that time to do all they could to help reduce the party's £1.3 million debt. Sean Barrett, Minister for Defence and the Marine, who received £1,000 towards election campaign expenses from Mr Dunn, said the coverage of the tribunal was driving business people away from politics and made it seem as if politicians were receiving money as bribes. He said that is not what politicians did. Agriculture Minister Ivan Yates said he had no difficulty in fundraising because he had no difficulty in saying no to someone who was asking him to do something improper. Both Mr Yates and Health Minister Michael Noonan described how Michael Lowry arranged for the transfer of money for their election campaigns from Mr Dunn. All the ministers said that no favours were sought or offered to Mr Dunn as a result of his contributions.
Our special correspondent Charlie Bird is at Dublin Castle. Charlie, by all accounts the Taoiseach faced some pretty tough and searching questions today in the witness box.
Yes, absolutely. When he arrived here, John Bruton, I'm certain he would have preferred to have been someplace else, as perhaps all the other ministers who came here. And yes, you're quite correct, and as David McCullough said in his report, that Taoiseach got very, very vigorous cross-examination. As far as I'm concerned, it was the toughest cross-examination that any witness has got here at the tribunal to date, and particularly when he was being questioned about previous evidence which he'd given to the Beef Tribunal. Certainly it was a very, very heavy cross-examination by Denis McCullough.
And what about his predecessor as leader of Fine Gael, Alan Dukes? He too is in the witness box and giving some details about payments that he elicited from Ben Dunn.
Yes, Alan Dukes was in after Sean Haughey, and he spoke about this famous dinner which he had with Ben Dunn at Barberstown Castle, and he described how they perhaps arrived there at 8:30, and maybe towards 11 or 11:30 in the evening, Mr Dunn and he left the room, where Mr Dunn then gave him the cheque for £30,000. So that was the first payment which Fine Gael had got from Ben Dunn, and he described how that was done not inside at the dinner, but they left.
It proved, Charlie, that what had expected to be the high point of the day, the intervention of Mr Haughey's counsel, Mr McGonigal, that at the end of the day was rather a damp squib, was it not?
Yes, it was, and I must say, Brian, just before 1:45, there were 200, 300 or maybe 400 people lined up there behind me. They all wanted to be in for it, and I have to say it was an anticlimax. We'd all been expecting something fantastic, some revelation, but it never happened. Mr McGonigal even slipped in the back door. It was only perhaps around 20 to 2 that we finally knew that Mr Haughey had sent legal representation. When Mr McGonigal stood up, he said that he was seeking limited representation for Mr Haughey just to deal with the confidentiality issue only, and that's the issue which he sought adjourned, not the tribunal itself, but just the issue dealing with confidentiality and Mr Smith's conversation with Mr Haughey. In the end, Mr Justice Brian McCracken agreed, I think rather reluctantly. In a way, he said, look, they have eventually to deal with this issue, but it was fortuitous that the tribunal was going to adjourn anyway for a number of weeks, and that issue will probably be then dealt with.
Just finally and briefly, Charlie, would you hazard a view as to what all this might mean for the timing of the election?
Well, at the moment, Brian, I think we're on course to have an election perhaps on the 29th of May, but more likely the 6th of June. And if this tribunal is now adjourned for 4 weeks, I think the likelihood is, as it now stands, this tribunal probably will not come back for a few weeks longer. I think the election will probably be called. I don't know what's in John Bruton's mind, but one assumes that we'll have the election called in a number of weeks, and that will then definitely set this tribunal back by a number of extra weeks.
Charlie, thank you very much for joining us from Dublin Castle. Talks have